Hi, welcome to Morning Talk Show. I'm filming this in my yard just to try it out. It's very hot here, and it's hot in my house, so you get to be part of the experiment. Today is my conversation with Gary Lachman. The least pertinent thing about Gary Lachman in this interview is that he was in the band Blondie, which is amazing because I love Blondie. But since ending that career, he became an author and speaker and basically thinker about the occult and mysticism. And he's written books on like Aleister Crowley and Donald Trump, and he's kind of up on the world of, magic and esoteric philosophy and that kind of thing. And so he is an amazing alternate perspective on things. I feel like everything he's an expert on is kind of considered a marginal or a marginalized viewpoint. And yet when I listen to Gary speak or anything he's written about, it's so wise and interesting and not at all in conflict with any of my own views, which are obviously informed by more like Judeo-Christian traditions. So I wanted to talk to Gary in general. We talked about purpose and talked about kind of his life story and the transitions and turns his life has taken. Really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you do as well. Please like and subscribe, ring the bell if you want to be notified about future episodes. Thanks so much. Enjoy. Gary Lachman, welcome to Morning Talk Show. I'll say that in case I want to cut out that stuff about us talking about the connection.
Right.
But I saw you speak to the Explorers Club, and that Sarah Janes, who was also on this podcast, runs, and I loved it and looked into you and have listened to you speak quite a bit. And the thing that I kind of wanted to hone in on, the thing that made me want to talk to you the most was something that kind of ties together my sort of spiritual, psychological, philosophical interest and sort of a more personal element of my life. And that is that you did a pretty dramatic job change, vocational change, when you were about 40, apparently, if I have my information correct.
Well, I mean, if you mean going from being a music writer, there was like a decade in between that actually happened. So in between there, I was trying to have an academic career, if we're going to talk about it in that way. But
Sure.
yeah, I mean, that was the big change. That's fine, yeah.
So there, I mean, there was a shift anyway, like your life has changed, kind of the focus of your sort of vocation has changed over time. And that really interests me because as someone like I'm 40 now, and I've always kind of struggled with a sense of vocation and purpose. And I was raised to feel that our purpose in life is very distinct. And I was raised in a conservative Christian environment. And so I was raised to feel that my purpose was very much laid out and laid out in front of me. And when, there would be a missionary would come to church or whatever and talk about how they had prayed, God, send me anywhere but Africa. And then with a smirk and a laugh, they'd say, and he sent me to Africa, of course. I lived with this fear that my purpose and that my sort of the command for my life was going to be something I didn't want to do specifically because I didn't want to do it. So I'm interested to hear kind of how you would frame and characterize purpose and kind of how you would describe your mental life as you transitioned, So I guess we need a little bit of autobiography first, and then move into that.
Sounds good. All right, let me just fill my glass here. water and then we'll get
Certainly.
going. Okay.
Yeah. So autobiographically, you or not autobiographically because I'm asking you, but you started off in a music career, playing in Blondie, and I'm interested in kind of where I'm not interested. I mean, I am interested in why you wanted to be in Blondie, but that seems pretty obvious and cool. But I'm interested in when the seeds of change began and kind of what was going on in your mind and in your sort of thought life as this sort of long form change happened. Is that too broad of a question?
Well, I mean, actually, no, not at all. I mean, it's well, I mean, I get asked it all the time, as it were. But I mean, initially, I wanted to be a writer for some reason. I don't know why. I mean, I'm actually going to try and delve into this and find out where did this come from, because there's no one in my family that had any kind of nobody read a book, you know, really anywhere, even in the sort of further ripples of the extended family. But no, for some reason. Uh, when I was adolescent, I started out wanting to be a comic book. I wanted to be a comic book artist. That was the first thing. But then I wanted to be a poet for whatever reason. And then playing music actually by through writing the poetry in the sense it was very bad poetry and it hasn't survived. I'm glad. But I was living in New York at this time in the East Village on East 10th Street, and I was working as a messenger and starving and all this kind of stuff. But someone I knew from New Jersey, where I grew up, was a drummer, and I knew him from bands in high school. And he had answered an ad in the Village Voice. They were looking for a power drummer, and it turned out to be the sort of what became later on, Blondie. And so he was playing in these gigs, and I was living in this sort of dump storefront in off Avenue A, and in the place there was a sort of broken down piano, and I had all these friends I knew when I was growing up were all musicians when I was a teenager, but I could barely just kind of pick up a few chords here and there. But luckily, that's what you.
Uh-oh. Oh, goodness. Yeah, you have frozen up. Doggone it. You've frozen up entirely.
As well. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, you're back. That's so strange. I did a podcast interview just yesterday afternoon with this exact setup. Now it's telling me my connection is unstable.
That's what it's telling me too. But I also have the
full bars.
the radiation waves.
It could honestly be that the Zoom
and the modem.
Yeah. Well, okay. Okay. It looks like you're back though. So I wonder if I should.
Yeah.
I wonder if I should sort of restart it and see if that helps. Yeah.
Shut down and reconnect.
Yeah.
That's usually what everyone says.
Yeah. Maybe that's the thing to do, because I did leave this computer on overnight, and maybe that's the thing. Is that okay? If I restart my computer and then
fine, let's just do it. So
log back on.
So you're gonna reboot. You're gonna reboot. All right. Well, I'll do the same then.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It'll just be back
signing off now, and I'm gonna do the same thing. Okay.
Just a couple of minutes. Thanks.
Here we go.
Okay.
The same high school together.
Mm-hmm.
He had answered the ad, and he started playing with them. And their bass player quit to join another band called Television, and they needed a bass player. And he said, "Why don't you come and audition?" So I could, sort of almost kind of maybe play, sort of thing. And I went, and it was fine. And so that's how I started playing with them in spring. I mean, a little bit, another month or so around this time of the year in low back in the day of 1975. And then so at that time it was, I was writing songs in Blondie, and then I had my own band after Blondie. But my interest in the sort of thing I'm doing now started then. I mean, that's the other story, because at one point I was living in a loft space on the Bowery, not very close to this club called CBGB's, which is just this dive of a bar.
Of course.
Where bands, Patti Smith and the Ramones and Talking Heads and a variety of other, people came out of there, Blondie as well. And so in this loft space, it was at 3 floors. One of the people, the fellow who was renting us our floor, he was very interested in Aleister Crowley, who was this dark magician of the 20th century.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
had tarot cards and a variety of other things. And then Debbie and Chris, they had a kind of kitschy interest in this stuff. So I didn't have any interest in it before then. But what had happened is I came across a book by a British writer named Colin Wilson. And
Right.
it was a book, it was called The Occult. And it was a history of it, but written from a sort of philosophical or psychological, literary sort of point of view. And it was just a gripping read. And so I just became fascinated with him from reading that book. And subsequently, many, many years later, I'm been doing it for, I'm doing it for many, many years now too. I'm sort of doing it for 25 years now. So that's the interest. So what I wound up doing, my interest in it started then, but at that time I was, but even still, some of the songs I was writing were informed with this sort of thing. Even a song I wrote for Blondie that was a hit called "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear," and it was about these sort of telepathic dreams my girlfriend at the time and I were having. And then and my own band, we didn't get a deal and all that, but it was called The Know, K-N-O-W, and that was because of my interest in Gnosticism. So I was always sort of reading this kind of stuff for fun.
Yeah.
But then what I said in my memoir of my time with Blondie, called New York Rocker, I just became too smart for rock and roll. I mean, I just was reading too many things, and you it comes to a point you realize you can't sort of write songs anymore about the sort of things that are really interesting you. So I just dropped out after the end of '81. That year I did 2 tours, just playing as a hired gun, as it were, a guitarist with Iggy Pop. 2 North American tours. We played Canada.
Cool.
We played Toronto and Montreal and places like
that. That's awesome. So, I mean, that's really interesting. I guess that what it kind of highlights is that your kind of spiritual, I guess you could say, or philosophical interests kind of guided you on a different path, kind of made it at a certain point. It was like the thing you were, the place you were, didn't let you fully express kind of what was going on. And that's a really interesting, because I would imagine that transition was not a lucrative one in terms of like, and it didn't increase your visibility, and it didn't increase like some of the things that sort of, it didn't increase the things that might look to everyone else in your life like success. So were you conflicted about that, or did you?
No. I mean, I at one point I went back. I mean, after about 3 years where I was living off my royalties for a while, actually, because one song did very well. The song "The Presence Dear" was a big hit here, in the UK and in Europe. And friends said, "Why don't you go back to university and do something, because you read all these books anyway." So I'd spent a few years just reading everything and so on. So I went back and I got a degree in philosophy. And my philosophy professor said, "So what are you doing? Because they want to be rock. You meet some of these academics, maybe more of them nowadays, because because they teach pop culture. They teach, you can get a degree in rock and roll. Well, any case, it's like, and they want to, and you did it already, and it's like, no, actually I do want to read Kant. Can we do this? I don't want to talk about the Rolling Stones later, but that kind of thing. And so they had no idea why I would ever want to do anything like this whatsoever. And so, but I was, I guess you could say, following a path, but I didn't think of it as following my spiritual path in that kind of self-conscious way. But I did feel, I was driven by certain, put it this way, psychological, if you know the work of the American psychologist Abraham Maslow in the 20th century. Well, he's not as well known these days, but he was very in the 60s into the 70s and sometimes into the 80s, but humanistic psychology. But he has this notion of this hierarchy of needs.
Yeah,
and
that's
it's a
that's the
kind of
only part I really know.
level. And so, when, and I felt that I was being, I was pursuing that higher need of self-actualization, put it
Right.
that
So
way. Which,
yeah.
once you start talking about it, it sounds very corny and all, even though I write books about it. So I don't like to go around and trumpet about my own kind of spiritual sort of journey, but I am obsessed with these sorts of ideas
Right.
and I mean, fundamental questions, ultimate
Yeah.
fundamental questions, what was
Well,
it? Well, meaning of life and all that sort of thing. So that's the kind of thing that I took very, very seriously.
yeah.
And even when I was playing in a band and all that, and then once I could no longer, basically, I couldn't write songs anymore at a certain point
Right.
because the things that had, sort of moved me to write the songs, I was no longer moved by them so much. And so that's when I went through a long period where I, wanted to transition, as one would say, to the intellectual I am today or something like that. But it
Yeah.
took quite some time because I had to learn how to write. Whereas
Right.
when I was doing music, that just came out sort of naturally. That
Okay.
was more the
Yeah.
muse. The muse just spoke then. Whereas when
Yeah.
I had to learn how to write something that someone else would not only pay me for, but would actually want to read.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting. I mean, yeah, I mean, and I've often thought about that CBGB's period of time and how the aesthetic sense was so strong that it did seem effortless when you sort of hear bands from that time and hear music from that time, Blondie included. I love Blondie, and so I wonder if maybe the fact that you were involved in art had given you a glimpse, because I share the same kind of reticence to talk about the idea of being self-actualized, because it's a very dualistic concept, like I was one of you
Well,
and now
the thing
I
is,
am.
if you are, you don't want to talk about it. You just want to get on and do what you do.
Well,
So
that's
I'm more interested in talking about the ideas. Like, so, oh,
right.
really? Tell me more about that than like, oh, my, that's what I mean. Like, because then you're still sort of, you
Well,
know
yeah,
what I mean?
no,
In
exactly. And
any
I'm
case, I don't mean to interrupt. Sorry, go ahead.
no, that's okay.
Yeah.
I just mean that it's something that almost needs to be talked about, but like you say, those who have caught little glimpses of it, um, it's not it seems a little bit almost like pompous or something. But I think we can create a
I
safe
don't
space
mind.
where that's not
I
the
have no
case.
idea. People have
And
been calling me pompous for a long time. I'm immune. It doesn't matter to me whatsoever in
okay.
any way. So it's fine.
That's good, but I've wondered about this because I'm also a musician and an artist myself, and I kind of feel like the being involved in art gives you these little glimpses of a higher reality, and there's not necessarily a lot of messaging, depending on where you are, that invites you to delve further into that, but you can't ever totally forget about it. So I
Mm.
wonder if the fact that you'd been an artist, you'd probably had these kind of transcendent moments of in playing art and in being on stage, where there had been almost a spiritual component, whether you acknowledged it or not, that made it much easier to move into like
Yeah,
what.
yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, the thing I have against spiritual, it seems to have taken over from, I mean, I consider myself more of an existentialist, like
sure,
but I'm not against, it's not like I'm against it, but it already carries all this baggage, in
of
certain ways.
course.
Like, I mean, for
Yeah,
me, it was more about, yeah, it's a journey, but it's about into your own identity and meaning and being and all this kind of thing. And again, I'm not self-conscious, or if I was self-conscious about this when I was 21, it wasn't some pompous
right.
sort of presumptuous way when you're that young, but that's when you do it. I mean, and so you're doing it and all that. So I mean, I'm just, that kind of thing. And but no, I certainly think, because I mean, again, you're talking about the CBGB time. I mean, that there was a golden period when there was this mix of sort of art and poetry and this real simple kind of music that it was sort of people you could they were almost, there was like tunes again, almost. It was like,
Yeah.
because everything hitherto was all, either it was this big prog rock stuff, when you had to go to the Juilliard School of Music in order to
Right.
play, in a rock band, or it was, disco or the kind of stuff that was on AM radio. But then
Yeah.
what was happening in New York in '74 is like, it's very simple, three chords, and it was a song, and it was charged with and it was about life on the street in New York then too.
Mm.
So it was very much close about one's own experience, and so I was there in that, doing that kind of thing. And everybody name checked Rimbaud and Baudelaire and some, Verlaine, obviously Tom Verlaine. So that French symbolist poetry was sort of the background to all this kind of experience. So it had that kind of heady brew. And
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I had already read a lot of poetry and literature and all that kind of stuff. So it was a lot of ideas that, and so, I mean, but for me, that kind, and for my own sort of thing, I mean, that kind of current carried me on past, when I stopped trying to, be a musician. I mean, I did it.
Right.
I said I went back to university in the mid '80s, got a degree in philosophy, and then I thought I was going to teach philosophy. That was seemed the next logical step from, being a rock band. I'd go teach
Right.
philosophy, and then that changed too, because I mean, long story short, when I went back to university to do the graduate stuff, it was a very different atmosphere, and it's like, and it was, it wasn't even, it was sort of the beginning of the PC thing, which now is just dominates everything everywhere.
Right.
And I understand quite a bit in Canada, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's what Jordan Peterson is all, up in a huff about. But
Yeah.
I mean, even me, when I was doing this in sort of the early '90s, it was sort of, there was no place for what here in the UK they call a mature student,
Right.
who's an old romantic kind of humanist, and he's not. I didn't want to
Right.
deconstruct anything, and I wasn't
Right.
interested. I think, no, these writers actually have something, to say. And
Yeah.
so it was like, no, you don't belong here. So I knew I wouldn't get a job anywhere, and that's when that's another major life change I went through from
Mm.
the 10 years earlier. Let's say was the switch from musician
Right.
into whatever. At
Yeah.
that point, a marriage fell apart. I was working for a time as a science writer, of all things, for UCLA.
Oh,
That's the whole story behind that. And I should never got
interesting.
the job, but I had written some articles and reviews, some
Yeah.
pop science books about chaos, theory or something. And they were looking for somebody who could translate the wonderful work that was going on in the molecular biology department into readable prose for the
Okay.
alumni, so they would contribute and all that. So I was, I never thought it. My wife at the time basically, nudged me to apply for it, and I didn't want to,
Yeah.
but I thought, I'll never get the job. I'll get her off my back. And, I am
And you
looking
got
for work, honey. And then they got in touch with me and they said, when do you want to start?
be
And it
careful
was, I
what you
mean,
wish for.
well, I know, but in terms of the real world, that was, in one sense, that was sort of like the most, I don't want to, furthest I got into sort of the, the outskirts or the inroads, whatever you want to look at it, of the real world kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it was a good job, it was a good paying job, and I had my own parking space or whatever, and, a
Right.
secretary and all that. But at one
Right.
point, I mean, I remember walking on the campus and I said, well, I wanted to be a writer, but no, I will be writing at least, and I can do some stuff on the side, because I had
Oh,
been
yeah.
publishing articles.
Yeah.
And I should be happy. And then from really deep down inside somewhere, it just came up, no,
Yeah.
you're not. And after that,
Mhm.
I mean, that set in motion a lot of things that I didn't have any control over, but in the end, everything
Mm.
fell apart, and that washed me ashore. That washed me across first the States and then across the Atlantic to here. So that was I wound up here at the beginning of '96, and it's since then that I've been doing full-time writing about this sort of thing.
That's great. That's very interesting. All the different phases, and what comes to mind when I hear about the transition from the different phases is that it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that when you were in the artistic community, like in the music community, there was quite a vital kind of life force going on, and people's interest in the topics of philosophy and in the various Baudelaire and all that were very existential interests. They were it was the engine to power, like it was helping to power this real force of life that was happening on an individual level and on a scene level. At the same time, that life within you propelled you to go beyond that, and then but then the academic world actually didn't have that same life engine. Like it had the information, but it didn't have the existential forward rolling momentum that the art scene had had. Is that a fair?
Well, I mean, you know, what can I say? I don't want to alienate, because I have friends that are in the academic world, and I am in it to some degree, to the extent that I do occasionally give classes, online classes for the CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies.
Right.
But I mean, just in general, and this is, you know, I'm not the only person to have voiced this. It has a very limited kind of constraint, and I think especially the sort of thing I'm right about. And I know in the last, say, 20 years or more, there's been an increasing interest in the academic world about the esoteric and hermetic and all this other tradition and all that. But it's almost as if, you know, it gives the impression that no one else was doing anything before that, and as if they, you know, we have planted the flag here and discovered this land. And there's a lot of indigenous people that have been doing work on this. I mentioned Colin Wilson, and there's lots of other people that, you know, were not academics, they weren't scholars, but they, you know, wrote very, very good books, and they did very, very good research, and they're exciting. And I think that's the other thing. And I'm not saying don't do this, but it becomes, it's people talking to themselves too. And you know, I mean, I don't, tongue in cheek, I would say I'm a public intellectual. Just believe me, I'm, you know, but I would say we that kind of thing is needed more than, because it becomes completely academic. I mean, I remember just recently in an interview, someone said, well, it's kind of interesting to see someone with your background, you know, doing this kind of academic work. And I said, well, I'm not an academic. And so, well, you're a scholar. I said, well, I read a lot, you know, and it's like, it becomes this kind of expert. You have to be an expert sort of thing, where it's like, you can be an enthusiast and very interested. And, you know, in the way that, say, I don't know, people, Aldous Huxley or, you know, Arthur Kessler, or someone from, you know, a couple generations back, who, you know, wrote about lots of different things. And I think today we have this kind of professionalism and this specialization going on in these areas. And again, I might joke before about, you could get a degree in rock and roll now in universities too. It becomes, it's so I don't know. I mean, I know I read. There's lots of footnotes in my books, if you want to look at it that way. So I mean, I do a good job, but I like to keep it living. You know, I like to keep. Put it this way: I want to write a book to be read, not to be studied.
Right.
To put it that way. Yeah.
Right. And I very strongly get that sense from you, because I'm someone who fairly voraciously and with a pretty high degree of ADHD seeks out people who speak with I don't know, speak with life, you know, like people who speak from an inner place of, you know, that's driven by felt need, not driven by a sense of industry or driven by a sense of career or something like that. I mean, these things become a career, but that's something that I'm always searching for. And I definitely very strongly felt that when I came across your work. And I know you've done some profiles on some of these people like Rudolf Steiner, who didn't seem to be hemmed in by sort of career and that kind of thing. And I guess for every Rudolf Steiner, there might be several other people who never got an opportunity to get to that level, who have that same kind of life. You know, following a life force or something like that.
Well, one wants to say mute and glorious Steiners. But no. I mean, well, the thing with Steiner is that again, it was at 40 when he had his sort of life change, because he was sort of an all-purpose intellectual lecturer for many years, say a good 20 years. He was an expert in Goethe, and he lectured on Nietzsche and Marx. He would lecture to anybody, and at a certain point he got asked by the Theosophical Society to lecture on something. And he found, this is when he felt like he had found an audience, when he can finally talk about his spiritual insights and all that sort of thing. But no, I mean, I'm just interested in lots of things, and I figure I'm trying to write the kinds of books that I always liked reading, where I learned a lot from the books, and the books set me off following a path. I mean, this is wonderful thing about Colin Wilson. I mean, he had a wonderful narrative. I mean, he died a few years ago, 2013, but he had a wonderful narrative sort of pulse style that would keep you just turning the page. And then
oh, it's frozen up again. Let's just wait a second here. I don't know if you can hear me. Oh. Okay. Oh, you've frozen up. Okay. Oh, okay. It's back. Sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, I apologize for this. It's not, this
That's
hasn't
okay.
happened. So anyway, you were saying
Well, are
Colin
you?
Wilson. Sorry.
Oh, it's like got it. No, I was just going to say you were able to edit it. I hope
Oh,
that we
yes.
can. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And
All right. So
I'm going to go back and select my audio again. Now, can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay.
Okay.
Colin Wilson,
So was I
narrative
talking
style.
about him? Oh yes, well he has, but also he said he has this wonderful narrative style, page turning style. But then also he sets many hairs running, as it were, because he just refers to lots of other people's work. He synthesizes, brings things together, and so I like to do that myself. So it keeps me reading, and I also, because I have written about Steiner and Swedenborg and Jung and Blavatsky and Crowley, Spensky, and a variety of all these different people. I always, if I give talks to any of these sort of groups or societies that are devoted to those people, I always tell them about somebody else. I say, well, the Swedenborgians should talk to the Steiners, and the Jung should talk
Yeah.
to these, because you're all fundamentally talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
But from different perspectives, and I mean, in a
Ecumenical.
way, yeah, sure, that's how I feel. I mean, like, again, not to make it too sort of self-conscious, but in a way, it's sort of the same thing as kind of like literary criticism or any other kind of critical work where you're aware of the different things and you see the relations, or comparative,
Yeah.
what used to be comparative literature or something like that. So again, I'm not self-consciously doing that. It just, that's kind of, in a way,
Right.
you could say that's sort of what you're doing. And I discover that's sort of what I've been doing now for a while,
Right.
sort of. And
yeah, it makes sense. It's kind of like playing different records for people when they come over or something. Same idea. I wonder. So I feel like these people that you're talking about, and yourself, and and something I aspire to be, is this. I compare it to in the one of the Narnia books, actually. There's this, they go to this liminal space full of little pools, and each pool is a world you can dive into, and they dive into a few different pools, and they experience a few very different realities. And really they're all windows onto reality, all different types of reality. And I think we have such an annoyingly messianic kind of mindset these days that I think it maybe is one of the sort of spirits that I sense, if you can say that, in society, that I sense that I would like to fight against, is this Messiah syndrome that we have, where someone would have to say Steiner or Wilson or Lachman are
God forbid.
are okay. If there's something that I object to, or that I don't fully agree, and I can't take these all of their propositions onto myself, then I can't, then fuck them, kind of thing. And that it's very strange, because I like to view all these people as portals, goggles you can put on, and it's a completely non-ideological way of looking at the world. And that's the sense I get, is when you speak about these guys, you're not talking about this, your Lord and Savior or something like that.
No, no, I wouldn't. No, I mean, I'm very interested, and in myself, I could even, see, because I said I've been doing this for quite some time now, where there's, as we say, you develop a more discriminating view of things over time, or one hopes you do, and that kind of thing too. And you become a bit more, aware of things, and there's a certain urbanity, in a way, that comes with age and sort of thing too. And so, I mean, I find all these people fascinating, and I've got in trouble with the fans and devotees of different ones. I mean, there's Crowley people who they watch
right.
Sorry, I keep hitting the table here, and that's
fine.
picture shaking. They watch some videos I have, and they say some sort of sarcastic things about it, or that kind of thing. And it's like, well, I find them all fascinating. I don't agree with everything all of them say. I disagree with quite a bit of what each of them say, but they're all very worthy of study. And you can get something from it. And precisely, it's not about, I'm not looking for a teaching. That's another thing too. Although I'm not against the teaching, but I personally am not looking for a particular teaching. I have certain ideas, certain things I want to find out, having to do with consciousness and having to do with sort of, philosophical, existential sorts of questions and the meaning and so on. People know my books. They know, that's the sort of area I'm talking about. So I'm very serious about those. I'm intent about those, but I don't, and I'm willing to check things out. And at a different time in my life, earlier time, I did a couple things. Okay, I'm going to pursue this system now for a while, and I did it. I did some things, and learned some things from it, and then I learned like, well, this actually isn't for me, and so on. So and but I think also, many people want an identity. Many people do want something that's going to tell them, okay, follow this. And and more times than not, it probably works. If you do follow all the stuff that Steiner says or somebody says, you're going to get something out of it. And so and for many people, it's good. So, but it is sort of like, it put it this way: if all you listened to was one band, like somebody who only listens to the Beatles, God forbid, never listen to anybody else. Think of it that way. If you follow one sort of, it's like listening or watching one television show and nothing else. So it's good to have a wider, view of things and to develop this discrimination, and also, what do you want out of it? That's the thing too. I mean, what do you want out of it? I mean, the sense of what's driving you, what kind of inner need in the sense of a purpose of some sense. And again, it's something that, it does come. And that's what I feel that I've been trying to do myself, and also to stimulate through the books. It's sort of because, again, this Maslowian notion of at this higher level, these kind of, it's no longer, you're no longer pursuing something that you lack. What he calls the deficiency needs. It's the being need, in the sense that it's like it's a creative need. It's sort of the need to know in itself. I mean, you pursue knowledge and you pursue the mystery of things just because they are there, and that pursuit itself is self-generating and is a value in itself.
There's always a horizon.
Exactly.
Maslowian is a great word, by the way. I like that. It's like Pavlovian, but Maslowian. So yeah, that's great. And I kind of feel like I get in, I have had this. You get infected with a kind of, well, or maybe I should phrase it a different way. There's kind of a natural devotion, a natural sense of devotion that I think comes out of human beings, and it's channeled into a sense of religious devotion, which even that term I can still use it a bit neutrally in my own mind, even though I know it is negative. It is so largely negative to so many people, but not everyone. So you get this sense of religious devotion, and then you get this sense of compulsory devotion at some point, a kind of a self-idealization, if I can make up a word that is a horrible word, like a self. I mean, like I guess there's ideologies and sort of that will draw you in and will kind of tell you that they're the final solution, and that I guess it seems commensurate that for some people we must reject those and continue to move. So I guess there's a very large and vague notion that I'm trying to figure out how to ask, which is that, and it's somewhat summed up in the story I've heard you tell several times of, I believe it was Colin Wilson, the more life instead of more death.
Oh yeah. Well, this was when he was in school, when he was in his late teens. And he was very depressed teenager, adolescent. He was going through all this existential angst in Leicester in the 1940s and things like that. And had it. He basically wanted to kill himself, and he was in a chemistry class, and there was, I don't know, it was sulfuric acid or something along those lines.
Mm.
and he was going to take it and down it. And just as he reached out for the vial and he was going to take the stopper out, he had a sudden, very vivid realization of what it would feel like to drink it.
Yeah.
So his imagination involuntarily sort of kicked in, and he suddenly realized what he wanted was not, he wanted more life, not less.
Mm.
And you can even, in gospel, life more abundant.
Right.
He quotes that here and there, and so
Yeah.
in his early books, like The Outsider, the first two books of his, Outsider and the Religion and the Rebel, they're part of this 6-book cycle called the Outsider cycle. But those two, he's still looking at it kind of from a religious point of view, and he actually thought about entering a monastery, and he thought about converting to Catholicism and
Right.
all that stuff, and he kind of pursued that, but he realized, well, fundamentally he couldn't give up sex. That was one thing. And then he thought, like, this, it really isn't for him a religious answer. It has to do with something about understanding, a real way of knowledge rather than a way
Right.
of faith, way of
Right.
knowledge, way of understanding how consciousness
Okay.
works, basically. So he went. So in the early time, though, he did think of it in that way.
Mm. So that's really interesting, and I wonder what your sense, maybe this is too vague of a question, but what your sense of life is. I mean, when you're pursuing, because I would like to be pursuing life, and I would like to cast off as many of the requirements of what life might be as possible. So yeah, do you have a way of describing the kind of life you're chasing?
There's nothing like it in the first place. That's one thing.
Yeah.
It's the one thing we can't compare to anything else, when you think about it, or existence, I guess. But life. I mean, there's life in the sense that we exist, and there's life as this kind of, very difficult path we're all on at different times. To me, it's a sense of, well, how shall I say it? It's something I've tried to get across in my books, and it comes from Wilson's work, and it's what I've called in different places sort of knowing in italics, or really knowing. So you can know something, right?
Yeah. Right.
Like Wilson knew that, yes, if I drink this hydrochloric acid or sulfuric acid, whatever it was, I will be dead. And yeah, it's going to burn my throat, but screw it. Life is horrible. I hate everybody. Everyone's stupid. Humanity is just completely muddled thing. It should never have existed. Schopenhauer was right, and all this sort of thing. And then he really knew what it would be like when his imagination kicked in and gave him full bodied, 3D experience, HD experience of it. So he knew what, and so that's really knowing. And that's, I think we're all subject to that. Again, he called it this, the indifference threshold. So basically we're all hemmed in with the kind of sort of field of indifference around us in which we take things for granted. But he discovered that a crisis, this is why Nietzsche said, live dangerously. And like so many of the people he wrote about, he called them outsiders. They threw themselves into these really difficult, situations or lives, or they pursued, danger in different ways. Let's say one of the favorite examples of his is when Jean-Paul Sartre was part of the resistance during the occupation, and he could have been arrested at any time by the Germans, but he never felt as free. So paradoxically, when he could have been arrested at any moment, he never felt as free. So there's something about the tension, something about the crisis, that created a kind of, inner kind of, he clenched his inner fists, as it were, during that time. And so Wilson charts different sort of examples of that. Favorite one of his, Graham Greene, when he was, again, Graham Greene, absolutely bored teenager, suicidal, goes out onto the common and takes his brother's pistol, and is playing Russian roulette. So he's bored enough to chance blowing his brains out. But the second that he pulls the trigger and it hits an empty chamber, he suddenly, everything goes, and the world suddenly becomes Technicolor, and it's Disneyland. And so again, it's this kind of that and that. And so this is something that he centered kind of piece of Wilson's kind of work on, I don't know, what existential phenomenological, analysis of consciousness structures, so and so, if you want to get academic about it. But okay, so he takes that, and that's sort of, I personally have experienced something like along those lines. I know, and it makes sense to me too. And so that's why I feel I can apply these kind of ideas in follow them out, and you could,
Yeah.
you can see them in the dialectic or dialogue between left and right brain, because the left brain narrows and the right brain.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. Ian McGilchrist's work is
William Blake
really
says, "Damn braces, but bless relaxes." So damn it, it's like it's the same sort of thing. So that just seems like yes, yes. That. Not only does that sound good, I've confirmed it to my own satisfaction, my own experience. So it's something that I think is a bit of real knowledge, and then go from there. So that's what I mean by it's not necessarily spiritual in the sense, but I'm trying, and the reason I'm pursuing that is when you're in that other mode, you see meaning. I mean, we're told every day by science all the time, and I'm nothing against science and scientists, but we are told the universe is meaningless, when actually it's absolutely untrue. It's dripping with meaning,
right?
But it's too meaningful. We have an inner filter that cuts out a lot of it, because if it all came in, it would completely overwhelm us. This is what happens on many psychedelic experiences and other sorts of things like that. And so what we need is some way to open the doors of perception a little bit wider, not blow them off the hinges, which is what you do when you take some massive thing or throw yourself into some kind of life-threatening situation. So learning this kind of phenomenological kind of steps in which you can break down and this is how that happened. Yes, he had this experience. What happened before then? And so that's what I mean by it. It's pursuit of meaning, but it's not through a kind of spiritual, traditionally spiritual kind of way. Put it that way.
And it's certainly not propositional meaning, right? It's not.
No. It's felt. It's felt. It's yeah.
Yeah, none of the books that that have been written have just finally and fully laid this meaning down. It's an experiential meaning. It's dare I even say subjective meaning. It's not necessarily a subjective meaning, but but our experience, we won't experience it in any other way. But
that's the only place it's subjective meaning, but it happens in here. So it's some strange thing that's, again, that's phenomenology, and that even goes back to Goethe. Goethe is saying truth is, I'm becoming anachronistic here, but unlike the X-Files, for Goethe, truth was not out there. But also, unlike Berkeley and Kant, it's not only in here.
Right.
It's
in a relationship. Boom.
They're both right. It's both right. It's where the two meet together, and that's where we have to. And so we develop disciplines, which how much am I adding? I see the world, and it strikes me as just there. No matter what I do with my eyes, it's there, and so I just accept that as given. But Goethe and phenomenology tell us actually, you're already involved in the world that you see, but you don't know that, you don't understand that.
Right.
But we have different, processes where we can somehow take steps back, and you can find out what's really there. What are you adding? And things like that. And again, that's also sort of a poetic kind of process. Because the poetic vision, or at least it used to be, when you saw something and it struck you in this kind of way. Yeah. Not like poetry today, it's just kind of a rant about social conditions. Right. But you saw something in some unique way. And I don't know how to say it. It struck you as new and unusual and extraordinary and that kind of thing. Right. That's kind of like the result of a phenomenological kind of process before even doing it. So the poetic moment kind of gives you the result, the final thing.
Very much so. Yeah. What strikes me is that there's a definition of the word, a misdefinition of the word real that can sometimes creep in to our thinking. And there's a comfort in, I've got all these ideas bouncing around based on what you're saying. There's a comfort in staying within the kind of border that is a lot more arbitrary than we might think that it is, the borders of ourself. But we sense these things outside, and where we kind of get hung up is on this idea of real. What is meaning real? Well, I what I'm hearing in what you're saying is that we, treating meaning as real without turning it into a proposition is the way to continue to sense life, and then accepting some of the darker things too, like death. Not necessarily accepting it, but I don't know, sort of becoming aware of it in a more embodied sense or something like.
Well, that's that's the existential being towards death in that way. That's very gloomy. Yes, that's going to happen. But I'm saying, but it is something. In a certain way, it's a strange thing because that's paradoxical too, because that enlivens you.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason Heidegger, that's what Heidegger said, like the one sure thing, and thankfully I'm paraphrasing Heidegger, otherwise we have to have another half hour to get through the whole paragraph.
Right.
But but he's saying basically the one sure thing that could cure us of Sinnesvergessenheit, forgetfulness of being, is the awareness of our death. And incidentally, this is also something that the esoteric teacher Gurdjieff said. There was like one thing that would the kind of permanent alarm clock in us to wake us up to being, because he too was concerned about our forgetfulness of being, would be the awareness of our death and all that, and the death of everyone around us. So again, that paradoxically, the realization of this gloomy future we're all moving towards wakens us up,
right.
and we become more alive to where we are now, and that kind of thing. But I think, and this is what Wilson does, is like we don't necessarily have to have that kind of gloominess about that first generation existentialism. He spent his early career, before he became a popular writer about the occult and mysticism and that sort of thing, the paranormal, kind of devise a new existentialism, which would use sort of existential phenomenological kind of methods and a sort of approach, but it would take into account the kind of visions of meaning of someone like a Blake, or Jakob Böhme, or even just any one of us on a like, it was a nice day here in London in February, spring-like, and and even though we're all in lockdown, people were out, and it's like that in a way that was sort of a mystical experience itself, because so many, I don't know how it is where you are in Canada, but some, we've had to stay in a lot, and so going out and even just getting the simple thing like seeing some sun and that sort of thing. So that freshness, the kind of freshness that is the poetic, experience, or the mystical experience. I felt some of that today just going out to the park and all that. So
well, I mean, it probably helps that freshness and that mystical experience is something you have an expectation of in your life, that you actually believe there is a capacity for. I don't think it's gloomy at all, personally, to kind of be aware of death and aware of suffering as part of life. I think it's something that we can even experience without a near-death experience. Like I'm just thinking of my experience of having children, and their suffering, even their psychological suffering that is apparent to me, it is something that draws me into reality in a way. It mobilizes me. It's like a little death within me or a glimpse of some kind of death, to see your children suffer in some way. And I think that the definition of happiness has been made so kind of narrow and silly and useless, culturally, and passively, but still very real, in a very real way, that we kind of think, why would you even want to have children? And I've got 3 children now, and so I've got 3 more opportunities to feel the pain and suffering, but they draw me into reality in a way that nothing else can. Like it's really changed me, and it's been a lot slower. I never had a near-death experience. I haven't been kind of drawn to suicide, but I know people for whom that has kind of animated their lives as well. So I don't really know what I'm getting at, except for the fact that these sort of negatives, the pain and suffering, of course, and death, draw us into life.
I'm not advocating a kind of Pollyannish,
oh no, yeah,
what William James calls the once-born kind of thing. I mean, I'm aware of that. I'm just saying, yeah, of course. I mean, last year or so, I've wrote a book about Russia and talk about suffering. It's sort of the national pastime. And again, Dostoevsky, he's, that was one of the things. He was very much motivated by the suffering of the world that he pursued. And this was, the final equation that he tried to work out in the last great novel, The Brothers Karamazov, where Ivan wants to give his entrance ticket to life back to God, because even though it may all be worked out to some fantastically cosmic scheme, where every little thing works out in the end in some way, he can't accept the suffering, and he says the suffering of an innocent child. So you're talking about children there,
right?
But he is trumped that's what Dostoevsky wanted by Alyosha, the other brother, who is the religious mystic, who's the devotee, and he's the follower of the starets, Father Zosima, who is this kind of holy man, and he has this vision after the death of Father Zosima. He has this vision where all of this, he feels this kind of connection between all the stars, up in the night sky, like the actual kind of threads or rays of light coming down from them to him. And it's this kind of, and Dostoevsky talked about suffering. He had it down pat. I mean, and his books are full of it. And and many people suspect that he himself went out of his way to create kind of, again, this was this living dangerously, instinctively. He went out of the, no, I'm saying this is the kind of thing Wilson would write about. He instinctively went out of his way to create some kind of uncomfortable situation. And it turned, in many ways, there was this kind of masochistic suffering about, and there's some ideas that he himself had, committed some rather odious deeds in earlier life, and this was kind of a thing that fueled him. So no, without doubt, I mean, these things bring us to life. But what I'm trying to say is that, at least in the context of the existentialism that Wilson's kind of work came out of, like Heidegger, Sartre, and Camus, it kind of reached a sort of cul-de-sac. It reaches a sort of dead end. I mean, the most affirmative kind of character of it, you can say, is Camus, where he says, we have to consider Sisyphus happy. So we're all part of this absurd life going on. We're pushing this rock up the hill, and it's only going to roll down again. It's pointless, but somehow we can rise above it by stoically enduring it and making. And Wilson just saying, like, even Camus, in his writing, even though he doesn't come out, and actually say it, there's moments in his writing where he does have these kind of, he does portray these sort of moments. So he wouldn't call them mystical, but there are these kind of moments of affirmation. There are moments when he just accepts, and you don't get anything like that in Sartre. Sartre is he's much more, because Camus is more of a lyrical kind of essayist, I would say. But in any case, what I'm trying to say is, yes, you're absolutely right. Suffering is something that, we're conscious of it and sensitive to it. Life becomes very alive to us. But there is, there's that moment, there are these moments of yay saying where even we say yes to even the suffering, but not just to endure it, but we actually, this is the life more abundant. We somehow feel life to such a degree of intensity and affirmation, and yay saying, as Nietzsche wants Zarathustra to, and Blake did, and all that we can even embrace the suffering. But we can't explain it, which, say, a Hegel or someone wants to explain, we have suffering because it's like this. That's completely contemptuous, because the rational mind, it's not the rational mind explaining the suffering away. It's some super rational or irrational or just completely just unconscious, vital yay saying of life that it says yes to life, even in the face of the suffering.
I love that.
Yeah, so that's Nietzsche. And Nietzsche, he didn't have God to do that. He just felt this kind of, what do you want to call it? This kind of immediate sense of the self-justification of existence itself, even in the face of all its pain and suffering and mystery and uncertainty and all that.
Yeah, I think of a documentary I saw about rats, in which they kind of they take a dead rat and they show all of the things that were plaguing that rat until the point of its death. And what struck me is that rat's life force was that it was going to keep moving because it was alive. It was going to keep moving until it couldn't move anymore. And there's a certain life force that human beings can have a unique, maybe a unique capacity to say, well, this suffering shouldn't have been, and I need to stop. Stop my, I just need to stop living.
Well, I mean, our problem has been, we're our conscious mind is, out of sync with the instincts and all that kind of thing. So we have, we become self-conscious, and if at an earlier time you don't think about these things. This is, there's a German philosopher named Max Scheler who said, even in the face of pain, animals always say yes to the world,
Yeah.
meaning that they're incapable of stepping outside of the world and considering it as something beyond themselves that they can,
Right.
make an assessment of.
Right.
But we can say yes, we can say no. We
Right.
not in the sense of like, just in the sense of, as you just said, no, I'm outside of this. I reject the world, or I reject the world system, whatever you want to call it, that we're in. But I mean, that's the thing, I mean, and this is where we get into this. This is why by the 19th century, after the Enlightenment and all that, you start to get the reaction in the Romantics, where it's like, no, we're everything's enlightened and we figured it all out. It's a wonderful system, but we're losing touch with our vital instincts. And so this is where you get this pendulum swing. And unfortunately, that's wonderful, but that also goes. You don't want a kind of anti-intellectual irrationalism, but you don't want to dry as dust,
Right.
anti-mystical, whatever you want to call it, anti
Right.
non-rational, sort of pedantic, reductionism. So it's this finding this middle ground where you get both sides of the thing, and that's both sides of the brain, whatever you want to call it, and bang, when that happens, I call that the Goldilocks sort of effect, because it's just right. When that happens, you have, that's when real knowledge and truth, or whatever, we see reality in full HD, 3D, and all that kind of thing.
Right.
And what we need to do is map out those moments.
Yeah.
We need to develop a language when we can describe what those moments are about. And we have that to some degree in great poetry and philosophy and all that, but that's right. I feel in some way I'm trying to do that, in a language that's just accessible. So I would say that it's more about metaphor and getting into these abstract kind of definitions and terms of levels of consciousness and stuff like that, where it just takes on a bit too abstract. So that's why I try to, insofar as I can, rely on sort of metaphor and simile and some imagistic sort of ways.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because the images that come to our mind do have a lot more to say than the words that come to our mind. And I think that it seems like there's a temptation and a very real outlet for an unimaginative life these days. And I think when we see, to balance out I guess we're almost talking about an acceptance of some of the darker, some of the darker death-related, pain-related things, and an acceptance of them, or at least a framing of them as being a part of this balance. And then on the opposite end it would be that the notion of comfort and the notion of kind of safety and security that we have in the West, in Canada and the United States, and probably in England, kind of a consumeristic thing where, the ultimate, where we've got, I don't know, it feels like there are disincentives to the imagination.
Well, I mean, that's again, this is a kind of dialectic. We create civilization in order to get rid of inconveniences and to make our life more comfortable, right? And then somehow we didn't understand that, and by doing that, we're taking away all the kind of challenges that get the best out of us, right? So that this is another thing. So that's why, again, Wilson's outsiders are extreme case, went out and they lived dangerously. They threw themselves into dangerous. And I don't mean lion taming, but I meant, they would just live in precarious situations, or things of that sort. And I mean, Nietzsche says, "Build your houses on Vesuvius." That's a great line and all that. But it just seems absurd. It seems absurd that we've struggled millennia to create civilization in order for it to inhibit us and make us feel so unalive that what we want to do is crash it down. And I think that's what's been in the collective consciousness for a long time. But the whole popularity, all these not only hokey disaster movies from the 70s, but these apocalyptic and then post everything apocalyptic films that have been going on for, they're like the hottest thing, even on like television on Netflix. It's time travel, and it's post whatever, everything. So we're all waiting for something to happen. I think that's the other thing. History's caught up with us.
Yeah.
And we're waiting for something to happen. And people say something has to happen. Like, we've been waiting for a long time. It's the 21st century already. We're in the future already. Why hasn't anything happens,
Yeah.
in some kind of millennial kind of thing.
I have
You
a
know, I
very,
mean, that's one kind of thing I think that's going on in our time now. But this is why I find Wilson is important, is that he recognizes this absurdity, but at the same time the need.
mm,
Why are these outsiders throwing themselves into these dangerous situations? Because putting themselves in dangerous situations makes them feel more alive. Okay,
mm,
but we create civilization in order to avoid danger. Fine. So there must be some way out of that. The thing
right.
is to use the imagination to basically create the kind of inner pressure that the crisis or the danger elicits from you involuntarily. And
Yeah.
this is where you can think your way to it, in the sense you can understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So, and but it's just as Wilson involuntarily imagined what the acid was going to taste like, do to him when he drank it. Graham Greene could have imagined what it would have been like to put the gun to his head and
Yeah.
pull the trigger and hear the click and say,
Yeah.
But the next thing is, okay, if you can imagine something, if you can imagine a threat to you, right, that is going to increase your sense of life. We're back to Heidegger and Gurdjieff saying what we need to do is have a very vivid sense of our death. So if we can imagine that we're going to die at some point, really do it. I'm not saying do it now, but really, really do it. Really grasp it in full body, full embodiedness of this is real.
Yeah.
I'm going to keel over at some point,
Yeah.
whether I like it or not. Okay, that suddenly makes us alive. Okay, why do we feel alive? Because we realize what we are going to lose. What we're going to lose by dying. What we're going to lose by blowing our brains out. Okay, step 3. Why not imagine vividly the value of what you're going to lose?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Rather than imagine losing it, remind yourself about why these things are important. Remind yourself why you would be miserable if you lost them.
Yeah. Visualize your investment.
Well, just why is it if I'm so miserable that I'm suicidal, right? That I want to blow my brains out. When I find out I don't, suddenly everything's meaningful to me. What happened then? Something happened then.
Right.
So why is that like a mystical experience to me? Because suddenly I grasp the value of these things. So what we need to do is develop our imagination, which is not about make believe. It's about making real. It's about realizing something. When you realize something, you make it real. We use our imagination to make the things around us that we already, you said, definition of things being real. We already think everything around us is real, but it isn't in a way. It's only half real because we don't fully grasp the full reality of it. If what do you want to say? If I, the slightest kind of thing, if I get so angry at what's on television that I pick up the toaster and I throw it at it, right? That may be very satisfying for a brief moment. But if I can visualize and imagine ahead the inconvenience of having to deal with the smashed television and all that, I'll hold back.
You can
so that's the kind of thing. So if I can imagine the inconvenience, so that's sometimes this is why training the imagination to induce the kind of thing that some actual threat in the outer world, because that's what we have to do. Because we're increasingly, there's going to be less and less ways we can go live dangerously.
Right.
Because even all that kind of stuff is all kind of, really organized, and there's a queue to get up Everest.
Right. There's a queue on Everest from this.
So it's and I'm sure everyone's 2 meters apart,
Yeah, right. Yeah, so it's very interesting what you're saying. Yeah, talking about kind of developing the imagination to almost avoid these terrible scenarios, to kind of get the effect of the near death without it. It actually brings to mind also that the birth experience for women, because I talked about this in another conversation. It seems like you at a certain point, it's such birth is such a visceral thing, but you commit to it way before the pain comes. You commit to it, and you've sort of make an investment, and you say, I know there's going to be pain based on my decisions that, I don't know what it's like yet. But there's something to be said for that as well, for choosing situations that, maybe force us to experience things. I'm not saying to be masochistic, but to kind of the danger, to commit to the danger, to live on Vesuvius, and to say that I might get, I'm probably going to experience some pain based on this. But even just living in the kind of, I don't even want to say shadow, living in the light of that future pain based on doing what you, based on pursuing
yeah, sure. I mean, life's a grim business. Life's just painful. I mean, if you stick around long enough, you just age does it to you, and you start to feel pain all the time. So, yeah, I mean, it's no, I mean, there's a commitment. I mean, this again, if you want to stay in the existential kind of vocabulary, this is making the commitment to life, and throwing yourself into it and not trying to avoid the unpleasantness of it, but also I would say don't avoid the pleasantness too.
Well, right.
Is the thing.
That's I
mean,
and
again, and I don't mean pursue pleasure, and I don't mean going and pursuing peak experiences. This is another Maslow term, the peak, which is again, it's this moment of basically, it's the same thing I was talking about. It's a moment of wakefulness. It's a moment where you actually. This is the thing is, it's unfortunate that we only have one word for this, imagination, and we also have all this other stuff that we. And rightfully so, because this is what we brought up, associate with it. So, but we need something that this imagination, instead, it's not about make beliefs, make real. It's kind of inner faculty we have to grab hold of reality. But it's the ability to grasp realities that are not immediately present. We're hypnotized by the immediate present. Reality is what's in my living room now, and you on the screen and all that. Whereas we all know reality exceeds that, both in space and time.
Yeah.
We're told to be here now, so that's fine. How big is here, and how long is now?
Right.
Because here is, from here is my room, but my room is in London. London's in England. England's in, so here kind of expands, and now is the middle in this point in what we call time that has, we somehow think 15 billion years ago maybe is when it got going and all that. So all I'm trying to say is like reality, and again. We have to limit the amount of reality that we're aware of, otherwise it'll be overwhelming. But if we limit it too much, it becomes boring.
So we
have to find that way we can let a little bit more in, because we can't make use of these kind of big, I don't think so, these big mystical psychedelic experiences all the time. They should really happen once or twice to give you, okay, bang, this is what's here and happening, and then you you grab hold, you develop the mental muscles to be able to grab hold of what you saw then, or the meaning of what you saw then, and that informs what you work towards in life.
I love that,
because I mean, I'm a firm believer that there are true objective values in the world. I mean, they actually exist, but again, they don't exist out there in the way the planets exist out there, and they don't just exist in here, because there is no in here.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there's no, as you say, you open my head up, you're not going to find. But what metaphorically, what we call consciousness somehow seems to be located in there. But it's reality is this somewhere the meeting place of these kinds, and the values are there, and they somehow somehow the outer world and the way we interact with it draws that out, and I would say, in one sense, if we're going to talk about the purpose of human beings and all that, our job is to actualize these values, to make values real in the world. So they exist in a conceptual realm or a metaphysical realm, and then there's this kind of just dead matter, which is nothing. It just doesn't have any kind of quality. And then somehow our job is to somehow actualize those things in this realm.
We find them and live them. We
combine
the two worlds together in our self, our consciousness, and our life.
And I also would say there's a progressive kind of extension of that kind of inner freedom into this world out here now, that we're in.
What comes to mind for me is that like the idea of God is extremely compromised, but when we talk about having this imaginal, or this reality that we can imagine, I think if with a healthy perspective, it's not really different from thinking of God. I mean, God obviously in a very vague sense, but just carrying around the sense that there's always more, carrying around a sense of expectation that defining the final more is the the greatest death. But if
Mm,
you can carry around the sense that there's more, if you can carry around the sense that the walls around you can fly away and reveal more at
mm,
some point, then that's kind of what I would characterize
mm,
as a healthy view of God,
mm,
because it's this thing that contains as much danger as it does promise and potential, and you approach it with expectation, and you approach it with care.
mm,
They talk about the fear of God, and I think that's like that's a more useful concept than maybe people think.
mm,
I
mm,
don't mean to be getting theological, but I mean, I guess there
mm.
just are different ways to kind of
Well, it's
phrase. There are different ways to kind of phrase these
mm,
things in different
mm,
ways,
mm,
in different paths, that the same idea can come across. That reality is there, and our imagination is a way to engage with it beyond, what we see.
yeah. Oh, I would say, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, even like you look out on the world and we see, say, the physical objects, material things, and something like that. But well, I wind up saying two things now. I mean, no one's ever seen matter. Matter is an abstract idea. There's things we say are made of matter, but no one can ever show you, here's a lump of matter. It's either a stone or some
Right.
water
It's
or
got
some gas, but it's never any, oh, there's matter. And what color is matter? It's
right.
just, I mean, you go down that route and you realize, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's, we can go back to Locke and Berkeley and those guys when you get into
Mm.
that. No, I think fundamentally it's having that vivid sense of life again, and when you have that vivid sense of things, you don't the need for that kind of definition and sort of thing. It kind of drops away, and I don't necessarily mean we're like that blissed out. I don't mean that. It's just sort of
Right.
like that. I'm going to say it, and I don't mean that. I'm one who doesn't. I don't think mystical experiences are ineffable. And I've said in talks, we just need to work on our effing, as it were, in the sense that it's our job to map out these kinds of things. And language is the tool we have to do that. And so I think we can do it, but it's a slow process, and it takes a lot of work and all
Mm.
that. But no, I think anything that vivifies, how should we say it? Well, every friend who asks me, "Oh, are you optimistic or pessimist?" That's the red herring. It's like there are things worth fighting for. Put it that way, in that
Mm.
sense. And I don't mean fighting like attacking the Capitol
Right.
building, but I mean the sense that
Struggling.
struggling in some way through your own efforts to be worthy in that, in one sense, to speak in that way, of
Mm.
these kind of values in the world, whatever you want to call
Yeah.
it, truth, freedom, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
It could just be the fact that you saw a tree, the roots of a tree in a certain way, and it struck you as just alive and living in something, and suddenly you realize, my God, life, things are real. We
Yeah.
don't have a language to talk about that. That's what
And
I'm
we
trying to
don't,
say.
and each
but
person,
but I was going to say, even that could be enough for you to realize that there's something of value that's outside of me. It's outside
right.
of my subjective worries. I'm aware of it through my inner world, but it's something that's not me, and it's of value, or it somehow radiates an aura of meaning or significance or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And that I think we crave that. We crave that. You can call it freshness, newness. We crave that kind of thing.
Mm.
And what
Totally.
happens is over time we lose touch with it. We lose touch with it. And there's these certain moments, crisis moments can do it, but also sudden moments of happiness. You're talking about children. I mean, I have two sons. They're in their 20s, knock on wood, early 20s. But I was at both of their births, and I have to say that's probably the most transformative experience
It's
I've
amazing.
ever had, to be at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and if I focus on it, I can kind of revive a sense of what it was like. But it
Mm.
certainly was one of those sort of limit experiences.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's that those things are so transformative. And what I love about your work, and I'll start moving towards wrapping up, is that there is a sense of journey. Well, your work and your life, to me, that I get a sense of journey from what I hear and see, and there is this this wonderful non-ideological nature to it, in that these various experiences that are going to cause this to happen. They're kind of burning bushes, or they're kind of moments of, where reality is speaking in a direct way, but they're not, you can't lead someone to that exact experience. That's the thing. And that's why there's always a good space for kind of this non-religious, non-ideological sense of just an ongoing search for an experience of life, and hopefully life in an increasing way, life more abundantly. And so that's one of the things. While it might be hard for somebody to pin down Gary Lachman, your message, right?
I'm very
But that,
available.
no, I know you're very available.
I know. No, I know. I'm
But
joking.
right, but I love. Well, you're talking to me, so you must be fairly available, because I'm nobody. Yeah. But you, I just want to affirm that. I think that's quite valuable. That there are people out there. I talked to
I'm sorry, go ahead. No, I was going to say but yeah, I the same thing here. I mean, there isn't a particular teaching, or I mean, there's ideas that I deal with, there's writers I deal with, and all you have to do is, and so it's not like everything a grab bag, but I'm trying to understand what these people are about and where we are, where we find ourselves now. I somehow found myself, 40 years or whatever, something years ago, 45 years ago, I was, playing in a rock band and first reading about this stuff. And now here I am talking to you about it, and have written 20 something books about it. And I also, as I said, the sense of the future catching up. So even in my sort of career journey, writing about this sort of thing, it feels like it has caught up to where I am now. Because a lot of the stuff, I mean, that was a book I did a couple of years ago, Dark Star Rising, about all the strange occult politics around the fellow who used to be in the White House. And that was almost front page kind of stuff. So that felt to me, it's my particular journey, but I also see the culture, and what I, perhaps presumptuously say about what I, the evolution of consciousness in some way. But it does seem that it has reached a kind of, not a culmination, but a certain point where, again, you're talking about transition, where things that were on the fringe and on the margins have kind of come into the center, and a lot of things, and different reality being up for grabs. I don't go to, there's a lot to say about that, but so I kind of feel like it is kind of in a journey or a kind of narrative, and it's come to where, and even in my own work, I mean, I said I've done 2 books about current events. So again, it's not history; it's like history now. That kind of thing.
Yeah. It's not just getting off into the imagination and disconnecting from everything. And I do think that there is a growing desperate interest, I guess, and desperation to hear about deeper reality and about the things you're talking about. And so, I just want to say thanks for talking to me.
My pleasure.
So much good stuff in here, and very inspirational, and very kind of, I don't know what I like. I love anything that gives me that sense of just calling forward towards an undefined future. From my tradition, the Bible verse that says, "Go from this land and your father's house to the land that I will show you," and then the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years, and but that call is, if you can get comfortable, with that call, I'm going to move to the land that I haven't been shown yet. That's where the life and vitality is, and that's what I see in your work. So,
I mean, just try to keep going. It's open ended, to put it that way.
Absolutely.
And I the more, how should we say it? The more the more there is to know. I think reality extends. The further we understand it, there's more there to understand. So let's keep going. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you having me.
Appreciate you being here. Have a great rest of your day. It was a pleasure to meet you, Gary.
You too. Take care. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.